Hey everyone, Bite-Sized Strategy Guides here. Today's video is going to be covering the animal scoring cards in Cascadia. I'm going to be going through them and giving my general thoughts about what the relative strengths of all these animal scoring cards are. One thing I want to mention before we really dive in here is that when I'm picking which animal tokens to play in a given game of Cascadia, 3 points per token is the general metric that I like to use. So a lot of these scoring cards, the stronger ones, are going to more easily get you to that 3 points per token, and other ones are going to be either unable to do that for you, or they're going to be so inflexible that they're generally not worth going for. The tiers are pretty self-explanatory. S tier is like, these cards are insane, you should always play them if they are available. A tier is generally very powerful, you want to play these animals if given the opportunity. B is they're serviceable, they're perfectly fine, you're not really excited to go for them, but they're not bad options. C tier for the animals that tend to be noticeably inflexible, that makes it more difficult to actively keep your options open and manage your terrain. And then down in the D tier are the animal cards I think are generally almost never worth playing, and that you want to avoid them as much as you can. So we're going to start off by ranking the bears first. We'll go through the different kinds of basic animals. I'll save all the Kickstarter promo cards until the end, and the tier will be ordered from left to right. So with that out of the way, let's talk about bear A first. Mating pairs. You gotta have bears in pairs, and they can't be next to each other. This one is going to end up in the higher region of C tier for me. Reason for that is this one's not particularly exciting. It requires a pretty big investment. You have to get at least 6 bears down to hit that 3-point threshold, and you only just barely get over that. And generally it's kind of hard to really pair this well with other things, because these mating pairs, the bear groups will end up running into each other a lot, and you have to be really kind of careful with your placement to actually make this work. Next up is going to be the 3 group size, and I like this one significantly more. The reason for that is getting 3 bears down and getting 10 points is pretty solid. That's not a huge commitment, and getting 10 points off of 3 bears is pretty feasible. You're not going to really run into too many issues getting this off. The problems with this card is that it only scores in increments of 3, so basically you'll either go for 3 and maybe 6, depending on what other people are going. But you're not really upset if you go for 6, because it is still a pretty reasonable return for that. Next up is gonna be Bear C, the family one. And this one's going actually all the way down in the D tier. So why is this so bad? So for this one, basically the only way to make this even remotely viable is to get this bonus for having all 3 group sizes. That's super hard to do because you need a bear on its own, you need a pair, and you need a group of 3. You have to put in all of that work, playing 6 bears in total, to get 3 points per token. This card is trash. I do not like it whatsoever. Next up is going to be big groups. This one is going to go up in B tier with our other bear there. And there's pros and cons to this one. Getting 4 bears, again, not terribly difficult. You get 13 points, very respectable. You have some flexibility. You could go for a group of 4 and then a group of 2. It's not great, but that still breaks out to be 3 points per animal, but it's not required like Bear D is all the way down there. But even just getting 4 bears down, it's perfectly fine. Getting 3 down, it hurts a little bit because you're not quite getting 3 per token, but it's not the end of the world either. So 4 bears, perfectly fine. Don't have to be in any particular formation, just can't be next to other bears. All right, moving on to deer. So the first deer we're going to talk about are the deer that have to be in lines. And this for me is going to end up solidly in the C tier, probably near the bottom end of it. Getting deer in lines is tricky because doing it like that is often going to interfere with your terrain, and it's kind of hard to make this synergize around other animals like fox or salmon. It's fairly inflexible, you do get a point return, but it's hard to make it coexist well with other animals, which is why it's ending up in C tier. Much better, in my opinion, is going to be this formation one. Making this work, it's generally a lot easier to get the deer in this kind of diamond formation than the line one. With the lines, you kind of end up with them sticking way outside of your board, but getting 4 deer in a diamond like this isn't too bad. It has a lot more flexibility, and it's usually pretty easy to pull off. Getting 3 deer, they're 3 points each. That's perfectly fine. Solid card, B tier. The herds is going to go in the C tier above the line one. I bashed this one a bit in the other video, but the problem with this one is that it just requires such a huge commitment in order to get a decent return per token off. Now, this one has potential to pair really well with like Fox C, for example, and some other kinds of ones. This one has pretty significant synergy potential, but it's, again, a big investment and there's better things that you could be going for. And then the final one are rings. Rings are similar to herds, but I end up liking rings a bit better. For these ones, you want to gain at least 4 deer in the formation in order to like break even. That's a little inflexible, but it is doable. And I think the extra points you get off of doing a 5 or 6 ring is fine. 6 is probably the most of any animal you typically want to play anyways. So having this cap off of 6 isn't a big issue. Again, not super great, but I think it's marginally better than the one that could be in any shape. Moving on to salmon. So first off is long run. Long run is ending up in the B tier in my opinion. Salmon I find to be a lot easier to make work than bear or deer. They tend to have better returns, which is why I tend to prefer salmon over them. Here you would need to play 4 to break even, 5 to start really getting a return. It's solid because it's in like a line like this. You have a lot of flexibility usually with how the salmon can like be laid out. Not as much as like, you know, Deer C, for example, but this one also doesn't require nearly as much of a commitment. You can get away with just 4 salmon, 3 points per animal. It's perfectly fine. So long run's there. Short run is, in my opinion, quite a bit better. So for short run, you're really aiming for exactly like 5. 3 is a good stopping point. Weirdly enough, you don't want to go for 4 because for 4, you only get like 2 points for the 4th salmon, which is super weird. But getting 5 here, it's a good return. Getting 5 salmon is usually not the hardest thing. Well, people tend to go for salmon, but 5, it's not unrealistic, and you can always stop at 3. Next one we're going to talk about is going to be families of salmon. I'm going to put them at the very top of B tier. At a glance, they're pretty similar to the bears they're right next to. 3 salmon for 10 points, perfectly good. This one is a little better because you do have the potential to more easily go for additional salmon. Throwing 2 more down gives you 15 points for 5. That's fine. It's not exciting, but like it's perfectly like serviceable again, but most of the time you want to be stopping at 3. And then we got salmon surrounded. This is going to be the first one I'm going to throw up in the A tier. This one can be very hit or miss. You want to build around this one for sure, much like foxes, but this one is very capable of giving you a pretty solid return on your salmon. Like if you plan out your board well and you make this work, you could definitely get more than 3 points per salmon. So it's going up in the A tier. The 3 kinds of animals we've gone over so far are the ones I think more so as like kind of the filler animals. Foxes and hawks are where it starts to get really spicy. So let's go ahead and start off with Fox A. This one is, in my opinion, either the weakest or second weakest fox, and even then it's going to be in low B tier. This one, it's kind of tricky to have a fox that's surrounded with all different animals because like bear, deer, and salmon all tend to clump up together. So it's easier to have similar animals around a fox than all different ones. And you can definitely fit like 1 or 2 of these into the board without too much trouble. But getting more than that is going to require some more creativity and flexibility on your part. And it requires certain other kinds of animals scoring cards to like make it work. But usually you're able to get foxes down like this for at least 3 points. They're going to go at the low end of B tier. Next up is going to be nearby pairs. This one is an easy A tier for me. This one is, in my opinion, very strong. Putting this next to just 1 pair of animals is super easy, super low commitment. That's 3 points. That's already the baseline. It's just putting it next to 1 pair of animals. Putting it next to another pair of animals is not terribly difficult, and that's 5 points for a single fox. Putting it next to 3 is kind of overkill in my opinion. Usually it's not worth trying to get it next to 3 different pairs, but you're more than happy getting 5 points for a single fox. So it's definitely high A. Nearby related is going to go, let's put it like here. I'm going to put it there. Yeah, it's a little more situational. Typically you can get 3 points with this a couple times, maybe like 2 or 3, but it's hard to do more so than that. So it's still solid. You're still happy to play it, but you're not like excited. Dynamic duos goes up in the A tier. This one, like nearby pairs, is very strong. Actually, hold on, nearby pairs should be here. And the downside to it is that it requires a little bit more planning and setup to really pull it off. When you're going in with dynamic duos, that should be like the thing you're building around. That should be kind of at the forefront of your mind when you're putting animals down into your board, is trying to figure out how to play around this. It's not terribly difficult to get 2 or 3 pairs there, and then you're scoring like 3.5, 4.5 points per fox, which is really good. Dynamic duos, super good. You don't need to get 4 pairs, 2 or 3 is fine, and you're more than happy with that return. This is the kind of fox that if it's in the game, I'll end up with the most foxes most of the time. All right, next up we got the hawks. So hawks are interesting. They are either the best in the game or they are absolute trash. And our friend Hawk A goes in the absolute trash category. So this one is kind of similar to the other bear that's down here. You need to play 6 hawks in order to break even on this. The fact that hawks don't clump up is a detriment because there are a lot of foxes that benefit more so from clumping up than from being, you know, all spaced out and stuff. Not excited to play it. You need 6 hawks to get 3 points per token, which is just not good at all. Connected hawks is a little better, but not much. It's going up in C tier. There's the added restriction of your hawks need to be in line of sight with each other, which makes it a little more inflexible, but you do get significantly better like point returns for that. So for example, if you have 3 hawks in line of sight with each other, you get 9 points, whereas for Hawk A, that would be only 8 points. So already with 3, you're getting like a decent return, but you don't really get more than 3 points per token until you get up to 5, and it's just not terribly exciting. It's kind of tricky to get a bunch in line of sight with each other, but getting a few isn't so bad. So I would play a few hawks, but it would never be my main strategy unless everything else was somehow worse. All right, next up, we got line of sight hawks. We all know where this is going. Easiest S tier of my life. Best animal card in the game. Not even particularly close. For the low price of 4 hawks, you can get up to 15 points. That's insane. That's already almost 4 points per hawk. And you can even build off of that more, where each additional hawk is usually going to get you an additional 6 points. That's insane. Like, if this is in the game, I would not be happy unless I had at least 4 hawks on my board in the diamond shape formation. That's the way you get the most points. So yeah, if this is in the game, you have to play it. If you don't have at least some hawks, then you're gonna lose to whoever does. Similar to that one, we have the Territorial hawks. This one scores you points depending on how many different kinds of animals you have between it, and it's going to go in A tier. This card is also insane. All you need to get 7 points for 2 hawks is to have 2 different animals between them. That's not remotely hard to do. You could get like 1 pair of hawks or even 2 pairs of hawks in a game. 4 hawks getting you 14 points is pretty good. This one is more of a support strategy, unlike Hawk C. You're not going to have like an insane number of hawks, but even getting 4 out with this card is already like insane. And getting 2 out is not bad either. Like, it can be low commitment, but ideally you want to commit to this as much as you possibly can. Though it does require you to very much set up your board with like these specific cards in mind. So that's all of the base game cards. Those are the ones I have the most experience with. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about the Kickstarter promo cards. I think these ones tend to be pretty bad. So we're going to start off here with the Grizzly Equal Groups. This one for me is going to go into the C tier. I'm going to throw it like right here. You might be thinking, why is this in C tier when it's basically identical to Grizzly Bear D? The reason why I've dropped it down a whole tier is that while, you know, the ideal case is the same, you play 4 bears, you're done. The problem with this one is that you can't play any bears after it. Unless you're going for 8 bears, which you probably should not, you are not going to get too much out of this card. Like, all of the other options are bad. You could score points for like having 1 bear by itself. Cool, never do that. It's basically identical to the other one, but with only downsides. So it's gonna go in the C tier for me. Oriented pairs. So this one is interesting. I think this one is probably the strongest deer card in the game. I wasn't really sure how I felt about this one until I gave it some additional plays. It's tricky to make sure that all of your pairs are in the same orientation, but I don't think it's tricky enough where it falls down because of inflexibility. This is the only deer where I would consider like making this like my dominant strategy, because you do get pretty decent returns off of it. Even at 2 pairs, you're breaking even at 3 points per elk. Going up to 3 pairs, you're getting a bit better of a return, and then 4, like the whole 8, that's pretty good. This is the only time I would really like focus my strategy around elk like significantly. Like the other elk, I would do it if I had to, depending on the game. But this one, I'd be like, okay, I'm getting some good points here. So next one up is going to be the gathering of salmon. So initially, this one seems very similar to the surrounded salmon, right? You get points for the group sizes around like a run of at least 3. The problem with this, and the reason why it's actually going to go all the way down in D tier, is that this is significantly harder to pull off. The reason for that is that it's dependent on group size that is directly adjacent to the river. So you can have a group of 4 bears, but if only 2 of them are next to the salmon, only 2 count. And on the card, they have kind of the ideal scenario. 3 elk, you have 4 bears, and you have a hawk, right? And that's getting them 12 points or 4 points per salmon. That is very rarely going to play out. It's so inflexible trying to get this down. It's super difficult to do, in my opinion. I've tried a few times, and every time I've had to make significant sacrifices to like the placement of other animals or terrain. And this is one that's a trap that I think even when it works, it tends to give you just kind of good returns, and you have to be fairly lucky to get that, and I just don't think this one is ever worth really like trying to play around. Red fox. So this one is kind of tricky. I'm gonna throw it down into the lower end of B tier. So this one, it requires you to have a single animal, a pair, and then a triple. This one, I think it's harder to set up than this fox over here, but you do get better returns from it if you are able to make it work. So it could realistically go kind of anywhere near the lower end of B tier, in my opinion. This one's tricky. Like, it has quite a bit of inflexibility in it, not as bad as like the pair ones, because you would need to put it next to a single and then like a pair or a triple in order to like really make it break even. And then you would have to get all 3 of them to get 5 points from it. So I just think it's significantly worse than like definitely the duos and the nearby pairs. It's probably comparable to the nearby related, but yeah. And then we have the final hawk card on the edge. So this card is super bizarre in my opinion. So this one scores points for having empty spaces next to your hawks. Now, I think this might be the worst card in the game. Problem with this one isn't the returns. So imagine an ideal scenario. You put this tile down so it's touching only one other tile. So that's generating 5 empty spaces for your hawks. You would need to do that, I would say, about with 4 hawks, right? 4 hawks, 5 empty spaces each. That's going to get you at 20. That's 18 points for 4 hawks. That's pretty good. The problem is that, 1, empty spaces don't overlap. So if you have like a fox here and a fox here, they both share this empty space, so that empty space only counts once. So your hawks need to be spread on the peripheries, and the problem is they need to be on the periphery. This basically means that you can't play hawks at all early on, and that you can only play them late in the game. Because typically in Cascadia, you're going to grow out somewhat evenly from like all sides. It's pretty rare that your starting token ends up on like the outside of like your board, just given like how terrain kind of like plays out. You can only really play them late, and typically this is the card that runs the most contrary to good like terrain management, just because like to put something on the edge, you can only at most build off of one of your biggest habitats. And this card, you have to like really change your thinking for like how you're going to be going into like the mid and the late game. You're probably going to be sacrificing your, or you're going to be hurting your odds of getting terrain majorities to get points off of this. And the returns are pretty mediocre. In the best case scenario, they're like slightly good, but like I don't think it's worth really building around this hawk. You can make it work, but I don't think it's generally worth going for. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the animal scoring cards. Let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of these. And yeah, hope you guys enjoy the video, and I'll see you next time.